Hi, faithful listeners. Welcome and good morning. Thank you for tuning into the Bible Explained podcast on this lovely day before Thanksgiving. We're going to be reading through 2 Chronicles 10 today and discussing King Solomon's son who takes over the throne and immediately causes a civil war. Within 3 days after he takes the throne, so it's not really good stuff. We will get into that topic in just a moment. All right, just a little bit of housekeeping for you guys before we begin today's episode. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, and I will not be doing an episode. But Friday there will be an episode as normal for all of you faithful members. So I hope tomorrow that you have a very happy Thanksgiving and contact me and tell me what you are doing for Thanksgiving. I'd love to hear about that. But also next week, I'm going to be taking a short sabbatical. So I'll be taking off December 4th, which is a Thursday, all the way to the following Wednesday from the podcast. There also won't be a Friday episode next week for you members. And the reason being is because I haven't taken time off in quite a while, unless I was sick. So I'm going to be taking a few days off next week from the podcast, just to let all of you guys know about that. So thank you for being an awesome audience and for giving me some time off. I greatly do appreciate it. Before today, let's go ahead and read 2 Chronicles 10, 1 through 19. This is the entire chapter. We're going to talk about the reign of Rehoboam and also the starting reign of Jeroboam as well. Now, you guys are going to have to get used to those two names, okay? Rehoboam and Jeroboam. I know they're very similar, but it is important to differentiate them. Rehoboam is Solomon's son, and Jeroboam is he's the future king of the northern tribes of Israel, okay? So that is what we're going to have to remember going forward into 2 Chronicles. So let's read 2 Chronicles 10, the entire thing. I'll be reading as usual from the WEB. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him the king. When Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard of it, for he was in Egypt, where he had fled from the presence of King Solomon, Jeroboam returned out of Egypt. They sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all Israel came, and they spoke to Rehoboam, saying, "Your father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make the grievous service of your father and his heavy yoke, which he put upon us, lighter, and we will serve you." He said to them, "Come again to me after 3 days." So the people departed. King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived, saying, "What counsel do you give me about how to answer these people?" They spoke to him, saying, "If you are kind to these people, if you please them and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever." But he abandoned the counsel of the old men which they had given him, and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with him, who stood before him. He said to them, "What counsel do you give, that we may give an answer to these people who have spoken to me, saying, 'Make the yoke that your father put on us lighter'?" The young men who had grown up with him spoke to him, saying, "Thus you shall tell the people who spoke to you, saying, 'Your father made our yoke heavy, but make it lighter on us.' Thus you shall say to them, 'My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. Now whereas my father burdened you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions." So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the 3rd day, as the king had asked, saying, "Come to me again the 3rd day." And the king answered them roughly. And King Rehoboam abandoned the counsel of the old men, and spoke to them after the counsel of the young men, saying, "My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to it. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions." So the king didn't listen to the people, for it was brought about by God, that Yahweh might establish his word, which he spoke by Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. When all Israel saw that the king didn't listen to him, the people answered the king, saying, "What portion do we have in David? We don't have an inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to your tents, Israel. Now see to your own house, David." So all Israel departed to their tents. But as for the children of Israel who lived in the cities of Judah, Rehoboam reigned over them. Then King Rehoboam sent Hadoram, who was over the men subject to forced labor, and the children of Israel stoned him to death with stones. King Rehoboam hurried to get himself up to his chariot to flee to Jerusalem. So Israel rebelled against David's house to this day. You'll remember in the last chapter that King Solomon died. He died after a very long and very successful reign. He made Israel extremely wealthy. But there are some problems beginning to form in Israel, and that is laid out in this chapter we read today. So after Solomon died, his son Rehoboam took the throne. And what's really funny about Rehoboam is the fact that he's the only son mentioned that Solomon had, even though Solomon had like 1,000 wives and concubines and probably had hundreds of children. Rehoboam is the only son mentioned. I have no clue how Rehoboam was like chosen out of all of Solomon's probably hundreds of children to become the next king, but Rehoboam was the guy for the task. So Rehoboam, it says in verse 1, goes to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him the king. Now, what's really bizarre about that is Shechem was actually on the northern part of Israel, and most of the times the kings would get anointed in the capital city of Jerusalem. So it's pretty clear that Israel was already falling into some problems for Rehoboam to have to leave Jerusalem to go up north in order to establish his kingdom there. And that shows that the northern parts of Israel were getting increasingly frustrated with Solomon's line, with David's line rather. So Rehoboam goes up to Shechem because all Israel had come to Shechem to make him the king. And then it mentions here in verse 2, this guy named Jeroboam. Now you might remember Jeroboam. We talked about him in a lot of depth actually when we went through the kings, because Jeroboam was the guy who is going to eventually become the king of the northern parts of Israel. And so Jeroboam caused Solomon actually a lot of problems, as you find out in 1 Kings 11. So let's read about that, because in 1 Kings 11, this entire chapter goes into Solomon's problems, let's say. His idol worship, the amount of women he had in his life that caused him to go astray and worship all of these other false idols, including Moloch, who was one of the child sacrifice idols. And Solomon did it. He worshipped these disgusting idols. And God got very angry about this because he had told Solomon, appeared to Solomon 2 times and gave him a warning. So 3 separate occasions, God told Solomon, don't worship other gods. If you just follow after me your entire life, everything's going to go so well for you. Your children will maintain the throne of Israel forever. If you just do what I tell you to do, if you just worship me like David, your father, did. And yet Solomon, in spite of God's 3 warnings to him, did not do this. In the end of his life, he strayed away from God. And of course, God knew that this was going to happen, hence why he tried to warn Solomon of this earlier on. But Solomon did not listen. So God raises up this man named Jeroboam to be an adversary to Solomon. And this was part of Solomon's punishment, of course. So let's read it, 1 Kings 11, starting in verse 26, and read about the rise of Jeroboam. It says, Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite of Zeradah, a servant of Solomon, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow, also lifted up his hand against the king. This was the reason why he lifted up his hand against King Solomon. Solomon built Millo and repaired the breach of his father David's city. The man Jeroboam was a mighty man of valor, and Solomon saw the young man that he was industrious, and he put him in charge of all the labor of the house of Joseph. At that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, found him on the way. Now Ahijah had clad himself with a new garment, and the 2 of them were alone in the field. Ahijah took the new garment that was on him and tore it into 12 pieces. He said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces, for Yahweh, the God of Israel, says, Behold, I will tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon and will give you 10 tribes. But he shall have 1 tribe, for my servant David's sake and for Jerusalem's sake, the city which I have chosen out of all of the tribes of Israel, because they have forsaken me, and have worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the children of Ammon. They have not walked in my ways, to do that which is right in my eyes, and to keep my statutes and my ordinances, as David his father did. However, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, but I will make him prince all the days of his life, for David my servant's sake, whom I chose, who kept my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand, and give it to you, even 10 tribes. I will give 1 tribe to his son, that David my servant may have a lump always before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen for myself to put my name there. I will take you, and you shall reign according to all that your soul desires, and shall be king over Israel. It shall be, if you will listen to all that I command you, and will walk in my ways, and do that which is right in my eyes, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, that I will be with you, and will build you a sure house, as I built for David, and will give Israel to you. I will afflict the offspring of David for this, but not forever. Therefore Solomon sought to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam arose and fled into Egypt, to Shishak, the king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. So that is clear that this guy Jeroboam started becoming very popular with the people. In fact, Solomon saw that Jeroboam was an industrious young man, is what it says. So he was a hard worker. He was strong. It says he was valiant, which means very courageous. And so Solomon actually set him over the workforce of the entire tribe of Joseph, which would have been the half tribes of Manasseh and also Ephraim. So those were the two tribes of Joseph. And Jeroboam was over all of them. And then this prophet named Ahijah goes to Jeroboam and is like, hey, God is going to give you 10 tribes of Israel and leave one tribe to Solomon's line because of the sake of my servant David, which is interesting because, David had died already. So this absolutely shows that there's life after death because God is still considering David, even though David had already died. Like there would be no reason for God to consider David if there was no life after death because David's life had ended. It didn't matter anymore if God had continued on his promise with David or not. So this shows that there is life after death, which is interesting. But regardless, God says he's going to give 10 of the tribes to Jeroboam and rip them out of the line of David. But he will give one tribe to David's line. Now, you might be like, well, wait a second, there's 12 tribes in Israel. Where'd the other tribe go? Well, technically, the tribe of Simeon and Judah kind of merged into one tribe, and Benjamin sort of did later on as well. So God gave that giant tribe of Judah, Simeon, and part of Benjamin to Rehoboam, to Solomon's son. And then Jeroboam got the northern tribes of Israel, which would have been the other 10 tribes. So that would have been the tribe of Joseph, which was Ephraim and Manasseh, the tribe of Dan, Naphtali, Zebulun, all of those up north. And God specifically did this to judge Solomon. But right after Jeroboam hears of this prophecy that he's going to become the next king, historians actually say that Jeroboam rose up against Solomon and tried to make Solomon look really bad and tried to gain power for himself. And that was why Solomon ended up trying to kill Jeroboam. So Jeroboam fled to Egypt until Solomon had died. And so now that Solomon is dead, Jeroboam returns home. And you can see how popular he is because if you go back to our passage for today in 2 Chronicles 10, it says in verse 2, when Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard of it, for he was in Egypt where he had fled from the presence of King Solomon, Jeroboam returned out of Egypt and they sent and called him. That would be the northern tribes of Israel sent and called for Jeroboam. That means Jeroboam had gained a lot of power before Solomon had died, that the people, like all the people, liked Jeroboam and called for him when they found out he was back in Israel. And so Jeroboam and Israel goes up to Shechem, where Rehoboam was about to be anointed king, and they say this to him in verse 4, your father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make the grievous service of your father and his heavy yoke, which he put on us, lighter, and we will serve you. So we've talked about this in some depth before on the podcast. Solomon was a go-getter. He was a workaholic for sure, and he probably placed a lot of burdens on his people. We do know that he had slave labor, though it does say in scripture that he did not make Israelite people his slaves, but they were still his servants. They were still forced in a way to serve him, but they would just get paid for it, if that makes sense. And, Solomon being such a go-getter probably did not give his people a very good work-life balance and put these big burdens on their backs. And the people were just getting so frustrated with this. And don't forget who Jeroboam is, and this is why he's so popular, because he was the leader of the workforce of the tribe of Joseph. And Jeroboam probably used that position to tell the people, Solomon is so terrible to you guys. Like, I'm sorry, your workforce is so hard. I'm going to make it easier on you guys. I'm going to do my best. So Jeroboam gained a lot of respect with the tribe of Joseph specifically, which was a very big tribe, by the way. So Jeroboam probably used his position to make Solomon look even worse, which is why the people call Jeroboam when they find out he's back from Egypt. They call him to go to Rehoboam, Solomon's son, and tell him, please make our load lighter, and we will in fact serve you. So Rehoboam listens to the speech that Jeroboam gives and all the people of Israel, and he says to them in verse 5, come back to me after 3 days. So in other words, let me think about this for a few days, and I will give you my answer. So the people listen and they depart. So King Rehoboam takes all the counselors, all the old men that had served under Solomon, and he asks them for advice. It says he asked them, what counsel do you give me about how to answer these people? So they spoke to him saying, if you are kind to these people, if you please them and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever. And this was very sound advice, obviously. These people were very frustrated over Solomon and over the lack of work-life balance that they had, that they were on the verge of a civil war. And the old men understood this. They saw what was happening throughout their lives. They had good advice to give. Not to mention that we've already seen some cracks forming in Israel, even back in David's time. You'll remember that even David at one point practically had a civil war on his hands because the people couldn't stand the fact that somebody from the tribe of Judah was the king. They felt that the tribe of Judah got all of the benefits, whereas all of the other 11 tribes of Israel weren't getting those same benefits. So even David was struggling with unity in Israel during his lifetime. Now, Solomon, maybe a little bit less, but once again, those problems are beginning to come back and Israel is starting to fracture. The old men, the advisors, see this and they tell Rehoboam, you have to give them what they want. They will serve you forever. Just be kind to them and ease their burdens. But it says in verse 8 that Rehoboam did not take their advice. He did not like the advice from the old people. He wanted advice from the hip, younger people. So he asks his friends who had grown up with him, what would you guys do in this situation? And so his friends tell him, they're like, you tell them I'm going to be a dictator. That if you think Solomon was a hard king, I am going to make your burden so much harder. You are going to fear me. You are going to listen to what I say. And Rehoboam was like, oh yeah, that's a really, really good idea. That's what I'm going to do. And so that is what Rehoboam does. It says in verse 12, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam on the third day, as the king had asked, saying, come to me again on the third day. And so the king answered them roughly. The king abandoned the counsel of the old men and spoke to them after the counsel of the young men, saying, my father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to it. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. And obviously the people were not very happy about that. They did not like what Rehoboam said. And so they're like, why are we even dealing with this? Why are we dealing with a king from the tribe of Judah? That's what they say. They said, Israel saw that the king didn't listen to them, and the people answered the king, what portion do we have in David? In other words, what portion do we have in the tribe of Judah? We don't have an inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to your tents, Israel. Now see to your own house, David. So all Israel departed to their tents. So now a civil war is on Rehoboam's hands because he did not answer the people correctly. He did not give the tribes what they needed. And so they go back home and they say, we are done with the line of David. We're going to get our own king. And Rehoboam doesn't even realize how much of a problem he has caused yet until, this is so ridiculous, verse 18, then King Rehoboam sent Hadaram, who was over the men subject to forced labor, And the children of Israel stoned him to death with stones. So, 1 Kings divulges that this guy, Hadaram, was the man who oversaw all the forced labor. So he was in charge of the slave labor under Solomon. And Rehoboam feels like it's a good idea to be like this dictator who is going to make people fear him. So he sends Hadaram out to collect taxes from all of the people. And the Israelites were furious over this. Absolutely furious, because they're like, this guy who's in charge of the slave labor is now coming and demanding taxes from us when we have this huge burden already placed on our backs due to Solomon. And they stone Hadaram. And, this was not the right response from Israel. Israel rarely has the right response. They're always doing the wrong thing. This wasn't Hadaram's fault. He just had a job to do. And the people stone Hadaram. And now Rehoboam realizes the trouble he has caused. And so it says that King Rehoboam hurried to get himself up to his chariot to flee back to Jerusalem. So Israel rebelled against David's house to this day, is what it says. So that is the start of the civil war that occurs between the house of David, or the tribe of Judah, and the northern tribes of Israel. And now 2 nations are born. The 2 nations are Israel and Judah, is what they are going to be called in the future. Now, one thing I should mention is that Chronicles is a little different from the Kings. The books of the Kings focus a lot more on Israel, and the Chronicles focus a lot more on the kings of Judah. So we're going to read almost nothing practically about the northern tribes of Israel from this moment forward. We'll read a little bit here and there, but generally, the Chronicles are going to focus on the kings of the south, the Judean kings, from here on out. And that's cool because we didn't learn as much about them in 1st and 2nd Kings, because like I said, the kings focused on the kings of Israel. So we're going to learn a lot more about the Judean kings and how they fell into sin time and time again. Even though Judah, in general, had a very solid start, they are going to fall into sin even worse than Israel did by the time 2nd Chronicles is finished. So faithful listeners, don't forget that there will not be an episode tomorrow on Thanksgiving, and that next week I will be taking that short break from the podcast just to rest and relax. I will be gone from next Thursday the 4th until the following Wednesday, and that includes for you members as well. But for you members, of course, there will be an episode this Friday over on the Bible Explained on Fridays, so I hope to see all of you members over there for a discussion from the Psalms. But for all the rest of you faithful listeners, have a fantastic and wonderful and happy Thanksgiving. I'll see you guys Monday. Until then, happy listening, happy Thanksgiving, and God bless you all.